Okay, so our final speaker for this afternoon session is Dr. Paul Sundberg, who is the Executive Director of the Swine Health Information Center. Dr. Paul Sundberg is the Swine Health Information Center's Executive Director. The mission of the Swine Health Information Center is to protect and enhance the health of the United States swine herd through coordinated global disease monitoring, targeted research investments that minimize the impact of future disease threats, and analysis of swine health data. Dr. Sundberg is responsible for implementing the center's mission and objectives. Dr. Sundberg was named to this position in July of 2015. Before leading the Swine Health Information Center, he was a vice president with the National Pork Board and responsible for the programs and personnel of the Science and Technology Department. Prior to becoming part of the National Pork Board staff on July 1st, 2001, he was the assistant vice president of Science and Technology for the National Pork Producers Council. Sundberg joined NPPC in 1994 as Director of Veterinary Issues, and prior to that position, he spent 9 years in private practice as owner of a veterinary clinic in Madison, Nebraska. In 1990, he left the practice to pursue further education and joined the Iowa State University faculty in the College of Veterinary Medicine, Department of Clinical Sciences. He attended the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where he earned his bachelor's degree. He completed his veterinary medicine curriculum and master's degree in clinical service and preventative medicine at Iowa State University. He also earned a doctorate degree in veterinary microbiology with a specialty in preventative medicine from Iowa State. So please help me welcome Dr. Paul Sundberg.
Very nice. Thank you for that thorough and kind introduction. Okay. To start, I want to make sure that I acknowledge and thank the organizing committee for the opportunity to visit with you this afternoon. I'm going to do some quick background history of the Swine Health Information Center. And really the issue here is what's coming at us, what's going to happen, what's happening in other areas and here in the U.S., trying to predict, looking over the hill, trying to make sure we're prepared to be able to prevent a response. So that's kind of the outline of what I'm going to do this afternoon. PED outbreak in 2013, we need somebody waking up and thinking about emerging diseases every day. That was the wake-up call for the industry in 2013. This was a non-regulatory disease that hit us. That refers to lack of USDA oversight or authority other than as an emerging disease. So USDA does have authority over any emerging disease in the country, but it's not a program disease. So they said, we've got PED now, and we'll help you in every way we can. So there was a wake-up call, and you know the implications of that outbreak and the outcomes of that outbreak. And we needed to have a way to look at emerging diseases differently than what we've historically done. So, lessons from PED. Pathways difficult, if not impossible. And we're going to talk a little bit about some potential pathways. USDA alone, we can't expect USDA alone to help us. We've got to have some industry responsibility to address emerging diseases. And this state-federal industry coordinated response is critical. So the Swine Health Information Center was formed by the National Pork Board with a one-time grant about 3 years ago now. And as you heard, that's the mission. Disease monitoring, targeted investments in research, and analysis of swine health data. All of those three things with the objective of protecting and helping swine health in the U.S. It's its own corporation. There's a board of directors. The associations are represented and at-large producers are represented on the board of directors. The board of directors and 2 working groups are really the power of the center. The monitoring and analysis working group, you see on there the names, you see really probably more important than the names are the categories, that we have practitioners, we have university academics, industry associations, we have producers. And an important part of this also is we have USDA and we have state animal health officials that are also part of these working groups. So monitor and analysis is just that. Monitor and look for things that come. analyze data and recommend actions based on data analysis. Preparedness and Response Working Group, including now allied industry and the rest of the groups together, help us to make sure that we are as prepared diagnostically as we can be, and also have a coordinated response that includes the USDA, state animal health officials, and industry. So that's a little bit, that's a quick background of who the center is, why we're here, and what we're trying to get done. Now, let's talk about the predict, prepare, and respond and recover. But inside of that, the real goal is to prevent. So if you can predict and prepare, perhaps you can prevent, which is the brass ring that we're reaching for as we go around on the merry-go-round. Predict, prepare, prevent if you can, but if you can't, make sure that you can respond and recover as quickly as possible. So, talking about predicting a bit, let's go over some things that we're working on with predicting and monitoring, and also then that's a monitoring of the state of affairs around the world and in the U.S. That effort starts with making sure that everybody's talking the same language, and that everybody that I'm talking about are the veterinary diagnostic labs that work with swine health, the veterinary diagnostic labs that deal with swine health issues every day. Iowa State, Minnesota, South Dakota State, and Kansas State. Those 4 laboratories will cover a little bit better than 96% of the swine-related veterinary diagnostic submissions in the U.S. So you get those 4 going together, and you've got a pretty good shot at making sure that everybody's talking the same language. When they start talking the same language, then you can start doing some analysis of that data standardization, and then putting it together with warehouse ideas that are under the control of each of the diagnostic labs, not identifying producers, everything's anonymous, but at the same time being able to compile that information, put together that data in such a way that you can analyze it and you can report it. The objective here is this domestic disease monitoring program. Okay, that's one objective, domestic disease monitoring program, and when you put other information besides the veterinary diagnostic lab information, you put other information like the Morrison Swine Health Monitoring Project information in with that, you can do a pretty comprehensive look at domestic disease monitoring. Coming out of the diagnostic lab, you only have numbers. You don't have context. And one of the things that's very important in this program that we've put together to do domestic disease monitoring and communication is an advisory group that looks at that data, looks at those numbers, and provides some context and some thought to what could those numbers mean. The other part of this, a really exciting part of this, if you can use that data and that information and analyze it, it's big data, there's a lot of things there, and if you can analyze that, perhaps you can also predict risk and predict outbreaks. And we're just on the cusp of being able to do that. We're just getting enough things together now that analysis is starting to happen, where the exciting part of this is that probably within this year we'll have a much better refined program for predicting outbreaks, for predicting risk of outbreaks for producers. That's an important part. So all of that's domestic, but also international disease monitoring in collaboration with USDA, because they're also doing international disease monitoring. We have a program for looking over that hill, looking over the water, looking internationally, so we can check things that are happening and perhaps then, as I said, be better prepared. University of Minnesota is coordinating the International Swine Disease Monitoring Project. We're focused on CSF, ASF, and FMD right now, and developing it so we can include production diseases. These are the high consequence foreign animal diseases. Hard and soft sources, official sources are the hard sources, things that are published, but those aren't necessarily quick enough to be able to tell us what's going on now. And so the soft sources are more of what are you seeing out in the countryside, the boots on the ground, and gathering that information and incorporating it in with the official things to be able to report what's happening across the world, and therefore better be able to prepare should we get it. That was a lesson out of PED, that we all saw PED circulating in China for a year or better before we got it in 13, but we didn't do anything about it. Monitoring and looking now is a focus, because if we monitor and look overseas, we may be able to be better prepared domestically, and as I said, with USDA collaboration. So a few things that are going on around the world. 5 or 6 years ago plus, African swine fever, which when I was back in school, that was one of those nebulous things that you heard about but never learned about, because it's in Eastern Africa and we don't have it here, and it's not really a domestic disease. Anyway, pig issue anywhere, it's a wild pig thing in Africa in certain parts. Not anymore. Moved up to the Eastern Europe, up to the Ukraine, up to Russia, and started in the eastern part of the Ukraine and eastern part of the countries related there, moved into Russia, and it's been slowly but predictably marching across in west toward Europe, toward the real pig production pieces of Europe. These are the recent outbreaks here. Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Germany's right here, Denmark's right there. It's moving primarily because of feral pigs. African swine fever is a very bad virus. It will kill pigs, except we found out that there's a small percentage, especially of feral pigs, that can harbor and help move this virus. So one of the issues that they have in Eastern Europe is feral pigs and chronic infection with ASF. Now there are other ways that it's moving in Eastern Europe, through meat scraps and other ways, but primarily that march is being facilitated by the feral pigs that they have in Eastern Europe, and it's moving west. So the question is, our risk, and especially our opportunity for harboring this virus in our feral pig population should it get here. Something that we've got to prepare for, something we have to plan for, because we have feral pigs, and should this virus get here and get into ours, we'll have the same problems that they have. So African swine fever is something that's high on the list, high on the radar of a lot of different organizations, including USDA, but something that we're watching carefully and trying to learn the lessons from Eastern Europe on. PED and Delta coronavirus are coronaviruses. And as I said, we saw those things circulating in China before they got here. Another one that's been reported in the last year is the swine acute diarrhea syndrome coronavirus, SARS-CoV. It looks like it has evolved from bats in China that harbor coronaviruses and cross species from bats to pigs, and is causing diarrhea syndromes, devastating diarrhea syndromes on some farms in China. As I said, the power of the center and working together rests in those people that are involved. And the monitoring analysis working group back in the summer, a year ago now, we talked about the information that was coming out of China, and that was on the ground, boots on the ground information, not official, but boots on the ground information about this SARS-CoV virus. And they said, let's just sit on it for a bit, because it seems to be in one province. It seems to be in one area. Let's watch it and monitor it, and if it goes somewhere, then we're going to think about taking action. So what has happened with that is, although it started here, it's also been isolated and identified in bats in these areas, but now multiple pig farms up in that province, and it's starting to move. So while it was identified and and maintained on specific farms. It's starting to move from province to province and cause some trouble. So one of the things that the center has done is ask for our diagnostic preparation, developing a PCR sufficient that you folks could submit a sample from a diuretic pig and have a triplex that would be a test for PED, a test for Delta coronavirus, and a test for SARS-CoV, all at the same time at the same cost, to ensure that we are, if this gets here, we're going to be able to identify it as quickly as possible. Because early identification means early response. Being able to early identify it gives us at least a heads up and a try at early response. So SARS-CoV is something we're watching in China. Other countries and other things in China and across the world, China, CSF's getting a lot of attention, both by producers and by government in efforts to try to quiet it, clean it up. The thing that happens in a lot of those herds over there is they have multiple etiologies and things are all mixed up. And classical swine fever is one of the things that continues to circulate in that country and continues to give them problems and is getting attention. PCV3. We are finding PCV3 in lesions for pigs submitted to diagnostic labs. They are reporting, and this is not official information on the side. This is, again, boots on the ground type of information. They're reporting that PCV3 is being found in their pigs with quite some regularity. So the center is going to be doing some work this summer with PCV3 and looking at the epidemiology of it, looking at propagation of the virus, because we haven't been able to propagate that virus yet, and putting some effort into trying to learn more about what PCV3 means in our pigs in the US. PRRS virus, a form of highly virulent PRRS virus, continues to work its way around and through China in their herds, something that we have looked at our ability to detect and react to in the US, should we get that. A lot of research into that. Pseudorabies virus as well, PRRS, high-path PRRS, pseudorabies virus, two that we don't want to get their strains from, but those things that are happening now in China that we're working on preparation and prevention. Cobovirus is a virus that causes diarrhea in pigs. It has been reported that that's the number 3 viral cause of diarrhea in neonatal pigs, only after PED and rotavirus in their pigs. So cobovirus is another one that's circulating, that we're watching, we're keeping an eye on, and we're making sure that we are at best, or at least, diagnostically prepared to find it to be able to react. But what they're saying, what the contacts in China are saying, is that Clostridium perfringens and E. coli still are the big causes of neonatal diarrhea in China. Really not any surprise. It's okay, so now we hear that they have some of the same problems we have besides all of these others that are going on. Australia is reporting an atypical porcine pestivirus, this pestivirus that Iowa State and others have found in pigs that causes neonatal tremors. Australia has had some trouble with that and looked at the spread of that virus via aerosol in some of their farms. Canada, with a newly identified strain of PRRS in Canada, 112, that they're questioning how and where that came from because it's giving them some trouble. 112 is not new to us. It's not unique. It's not new to the US, but it is to them. And Canada's reporting on that. PED and Delta Corona continue to circulate in Canada. And the spring of 2014, the Canadian Chief Veterinary Officer got up in front of the Organization for International Animal Health, the OIE, where all the chief veterinary officers, the chief veterinarians for all of the countries around the world get together and work on standards for animal health. That chief veterinary officer for Canada in 2014 stood up and said, we've got PED, it will be eradicated in Canada by the end of the year, and they're still working on it. So their experience isn't necessarily different than ours. It certainly is on a different scale, and they've got some other tools of being able to respond and work on biosecurity, maybe that we don't uniformly have, but PED continues to circulate in Canada in spite of their best efforts. One of the things that, that I hear about in Canada that we're going to do a little bit of investigation on is a hemorrhagic tracheitis syndrome. This has been identified in Quebec for 4 or 5 years, that they've seen hemorrhagic tracheitis in Quebec with an unknown etiology. They don't know what it is, why it's happening, but they know the syndrome. And this causes 10 to 20% dropout of their replacement gilts in certain units, in certain systems. They can have up to 10 to 20% dropout because of a hemorrhagic tracheitis. They've taken these PIDs apart, they've looked at it and tried to figure out etiology and haven't been able to do it yet. The concerning thing is that started in Quebec, it's now in Ontario. And that's concerning to me because we also watched circovirus in Western Europe. We saw it come to Quebec before we had it. We could trace it through Canada into Ontario and down to the US. So we've got this perhaps emerging issue, at least an emerging syndrome within Canada, Quebec, now in Ontario. We're going to be doing some work with the Canadians on hemorrhagic tracheitis to see if we can help with identifying the etiology so we can do a better job of understanding what that is with the idea of helping to protect the US herd. The UK and the rest of Europe, really the general type of things that are going on there, not hearing other than African swine fever in Eastern Europe, not hearing reports of significant changes in animal health, significant disease status in most of Europe. Okay, that's international. That's some of the things that are going on internationally. Domestically, Iowa State is helping to coordinate the University of Minnesota and the other laboratories, South Dakota and Kansas as well, in doing some domestic disease monitoring and reporting. Focused now on PRRS, PED, COVID, and CNS syndromes. You're going to see this expand to respiratory syndromes and some other issues that we can look at that data and analyze it and report it. A big collaborative project. Give credit to those 4 laboratories for the collaboration that has to happen in order for this to happen. And as well, I already mentioned the advisory group that looks at these numbers. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but focus just, if you will, down on this graph. From the data and from the analysis of the data, we've been able to analyze it such that you can see the yearly and monthly patterns that happen from the submissions to the veterinary diagnostic lab. So this is PRRS, and here is just this last winter and early spring. The lines on each side of that blue line are plus or minus 1 standard deviation. So we're looking at when those lines go out, what's going on. We're predicting that we can predict that things will if things stay within 1 standard deviation, those lines, that's pretty much normal situation for us as we have it now. The question is, though, if it goes outside of that, what's causing the variation? So for PRRS, you see outside of that line and that variation, the submissions of the veterinary diagnostic lab do correlate to the information from the participants in the Morrison Swine Health Monitoring Project from last winter. PRRS was circulating last winter. That's real, and that's reflected here. So those 2 things are correlated in information, and that's not necessarily unpredictable, but it is the way in the manner and the volume that we've been seeing. Another part of this with the PERS, increased PERS activity, is that through last winter and into this spring, now we're seeing more of using processing fluids as a monitoring tool for PERS, and that's reflected in this data as well. Where previously in that historical one standard deviation line was formed on not having the processing fluids to be used, we're seeing more and more submission of samples of processing fluid, so that causes some deviation from the predicted. Coronaviruses, PED up here. I'm glad to say that that PED hasn't been out of what can be predicted based on historical data. I'm sad to say that PED continues based on historical data to be predictable and to show that it's still going. But it's still there, it's still predictable, although it's not out of more than one standard deviation off of the predicted line. In contrast to coronavirus, Delta coronavirus. The Delta coronavirus activity over the winter and continuing was increased. We saw that was reported clinically as well as then reflected in that data. One thing that with Delta Corona over the last year, it doesn't seem to have been infecting farrowing houses the way that PED and Delta Corona had out of norm. A lot of that Delta Corona looks like it's been on finishing floors and otherwise, because we aren't hearing clinically that Delta Corona has been out of prediction on farrowing houses during the year. CNS syndrome, that's busy, but I want you to focus on, this is spring months of 2018, spring months of 2017. And there's been a 15% increase overall. This is the total of the diagnostic submissions that asked for CNS syndrome investigation. The total for 17 and the total for 18, a 15% increase in 17 to 18. So that's not an insignificant increase in 15% there. And it's something that we're going to continue to look at. You see on the x-axis all the variety of different things that have been identified as associated with the CNS syndrome. Strep suis is the main pathogen that's been identified here. That's the largest green box, but there's a lot of things that are going on. One of the interests is to track things like this atypical pesty, like saplovirus, like the enteroviruses, the family of enteroviruses that can cause CNS syndromes. Track those, because again, if we can identify those things happening early, we can be better able to respond. I want to show you some information about possible pathways and looking at pathways for introduction. Pipestone Applied Research, South Dakota State and Kansas State. We know that we are importing products from China, and that importation of products from China includes DDGs and includes soybean meal directly from China. And if we take the PED model, the thing that we need to ask is, does that kind of importation do anything to our risk of bringing PED or anything else into the country? Chinese grain production is different than ours. A lot of small plots that the grain is spread on the roads, that grain is dried on the roads, aggregated, and then put through processing. So there are DDGs, there are soybean meals that have to go through processing that may be able to mitigate any pathogens that could be there. But there's an opportunity for post-processing contamination as well. We haven't identified that, but certainly the opportunity is there. And this project looked at trans-Pacific trans-Pacific transport of these products that are coming in from China under the conditions, the temperature, the humidity, and the time conditions for that transport across the water. And It also, we asked the question about not just PED, but what's the variety of different viruses that could be. We could look at the model of transport across the water for a number of viruses. So we took 12 different ones, and these are viruses, high interest viruses based on a list of viruses that we know can infect pigs, and we put them through that paces of transport conditions. We also took the ASF virus, directly ASF virus, and put it under the conditions of transport across the Atlantic, from Prague and Eastern Europe, across to France, across to New York, and then finally ending up in Des Moines. Looked at survivability of ASF under those conditions as well. Here's the results. These are the things that worry me. You got to lose some sleep over. Seneca Valley virus is a surrogate for FMD, and anything that's red is bad. Red means viable virus was recovered. So we were able to find that under those conditions in soybean meal, in DDGs, lysine, choline, vitamin D, Seneca Valley virus, a surrogate for FMD, the cousin virus to FMD, was very well survived under those conditions of transport. African swine fever virus, remember coming across the Atlantic, was able to survive in soybean meal. What you see is soybean meal is rather consistent on things that it looks like can be protective of viruses under the condition of transport. So the idea here is to try to identify risk, try to help define risk, and if we can identify and define risk, that's theoretical, it's a model now. We aren't saying that it's there. We haven't done that monitoring to say, yes, it's that way and it's coming, or it has come. But that's a model that is a proof of concept. So let's look at proof of concept of some mitigation techniques that we could use. Additives to feed on processing that may be able to reduce the dose or the titer of those viruses in feed products lower than the infective dose, or perhaps process a control that we can help verify product safety before it's shipped, track those products all the way to feed in the US, continuing to verify product safety all the way across. So the idea there is different ways that we investigate mitigation. If we can define that risk, we need to know what we're going to do about it. We've already started that research on what we're going to do about it. Not yet done, but that's this year. So you're not going to read all that, but I will tell you that from the left-hand side of this going down, and then starting on the top of the right-hand side and going down, are the list of 40-some viruses that can infect pigs. The highest priority ones are the top of, on the left side: foot and mouth disease, classical swine fever, ASF, pseudorabies. Highest priority ones, the ones that we're most worried about, because those will be trade-impacting diseases. And then there's a variety of other potentially emerging production diseases, and also diseases that we have, viruses that we have now on that list. The important thing here is, if you take a look at the color, the coverage of the colors on this list, starting at the upper left and then the upper right. And this is our diagnostic preparation. We have developed or improved PCRs for the detection of these viruses as we've gone. Higher priority ones, we want to make sure we're ready to go. Lower priority ones, we're not going to spend money on. For example, a PCR for swine pox virus. We're not going to spend money on that, but we're covering the high impact, high priority viruses with our 2017 research for PCR preparation. And we're also looking at, this year, looking at developing ELISAs for some specific viruses out of there. The center is also supporting the Morrison Swine Health Monitoring Project, coordinated through the University of Minnesota, with the real goal here is that long-term goal: capacity for detection, response, and continuity of business. The lesson, again, that we learned out of PED was that if I show you mine, you show me yours, and we'll both do better. And that means sharing information, sharing health information, and talking producer to producer and veterinarian to veterinarian, and sharing that so we can all do better collectively. We're facilitating that with that project. One of the things that happens in practice is a veterinarian will get a diagnostic lab report, and either the diagnostic lab report is inconclusive, or the diagnostic lab report, veterinarian looks at it and says, yeah, but that's not it. Here's what's going on in that farm, according to the diagnostic lab, and they do good work, but sometimes you go, but that doesn't sound right. And in those types of cases where either we don't have an etiology, or the etiology, the veterinarian or producer just says, I don't feel good about that, we are offering support for further diagnostics. That's an important thing for you folks, and an important thing to communicate, that further diagnostic support is there and it's available. It's going to go through a review process. We just don't hand out money. There's a review process to ensure that the initial diagnostics are done first, but if those initial diagnostics are done and it's not satisfactory, then we can go into this and help support further diagnostics. So if you're a producer or your producer says, gee, I don't have money to go ahead and pursue this any farther, we can help with the money to help pursue farther, because we want to close that hole where if something happens, high consequence, and it has happened, high consequence, a lot of pigs die on a finishing floor, for example, and a foreign animal disease investigation is done, and the USDA says it's not foot and mouth, it's not classical swine fever, it's not ASF, it's not pseudorabies, and that's all we can do because that's all we're responsible for looking for. Then what happens? We've got to have support so we make sure that something that's doing that, we can uncover it so it doesn't become a problem in the U.S. And that talks about responses and the development of a rapid response corps. For PED, again, we tried to do rapid response investigations to outbreaks where what was termed epidemiologically distinct outbreaks happened. Those outbreaks that just were out of the blue in an isolated area with no idea about where they came from, we sent out teams to help investigate that. That was a good response. It helped give us information about PED epidemiology, but it sure as heck wasn't rapid. Sometimes it'd take a week or longer before we get out there after that initial outbreak, and that clock ticking decreases the value of the information and even the credibility of the information about the outbreak. So this program is something to be aware of as well. On the invitation of the producer and veterinarian in the program, we've developed a system by which we can have epidemiologists on the farm to help with outbreak investigations, and underscore that, help with outbreak investigations, where the idea is to help that producer, help that veterinarian on the outbreak within 72 hours after they give us a call and say, we need your help on something. So that's another tool that's available in the toolbox. Finally, all of this and more is on the Swine Health Information Center website, swinehealth.org. So that's your resource. There's a lot of things explained on there. Those monitoring reports, both international and domestic, monthly, and they're posted on there so you can go and see the changes, the differences. It'll help predict things that are going to happen, and that's where we're at with the center and some of the things we're trying to do to look over the hill, predict and prepare, hopefully prevent, but certainly then respond and recover. And with that, that's the end of that. Anything that I can help you with, any questions that you might have, or I'm also mostly interested as well in any feedback that you've got, any ideas you have on things that the center can do to help you on the farm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Good.
I have two questions for you. You said that 96% of the diagnostics go through 4 labs here in the Midwest. Obviously, North Carolina has a lot of costs. Do most of those diagnostics come to the Midwest?
Yeah.
Secondly, you said hard and soft. information from other countries. On the international side, do most have high-quality diagnostic labs, or where there's a lot of cost present? Or
Okay. All right. So the first question about North Carolina and other areas of the country coming to the Midwest diagnostic labs, I don't have any specific information of the number of samples from North Carolina that come into the diagnostic labs here. However, they do. North Carolina's also has a diagnostic lab, and they're working on providing that service. But I do know that it's been reported by these diagnostic labs, they'll handle 96%. So yeah, North Carolina is going to have more than 4% of the diagnostics that happen, so I can't exclude those from that 96% that comes to the Midwest diagnostic labs. Second question was about the, and help me if I heard this.
The quality of information from international.
Yeah.
Good, high-quality diagnostics.
Yeah, the quality of information from other countries' diagnostic labs, totally dependent upon the country, of course. The European diagnostic labs, yes, high-quality information. Canada, of course. The China and Asia are challenged with diagnostic lab expertise and diagnostic lab capacity. There are a lot of private diagnostic labs in China that are working and working on whatever they do with their diagnosis. They do not have the land-grant university system that we have here. So everything is disassembled and not coordinated. Many companies have their own diagnostic labs. Swine production companies have their own. There are universities that have their own. Not very well coordinated. And out of China with their diagnostic labs, those folks tell me that they have problems with credible diagnostics. So yeah, it varies greatly across the world. There aren't very many places that have the diagnostics that we have.
Do we have one more question? All right, so with that,
Thank you,
let's
folks.
thank our speaker.